What we're watching here is something from a show called Diary of a CEO. It's Daniel Kokotajlo, and we're going to watch what he says about our future and some of the things I want to talk about that we can actually partake in to kind of shape this new future, and that many of you who are sitting back and not really getting into AI or getting into the understanding of what's going on with the politics of AI need to start getting into it today. So we're going to start out with this part right here, and it's the beginning of the clip that I'm going to take a look at. All right, now here we go. Stephen Bartlett starts out by talking about this part.
I've heard you say, I think it was on the Daily Show, the interview you did, you said that you think there's a 70% chance of human extinction due to AI.
I wouldn't say human extinction exactly. I would say something like 70% chance that this goes horribly wrong, like human extinction, but that's just one of several possibilities.
You've been around these CEOs. I mean, you've worked for Sam Altman at OpenAI before you quit. Do you think that they think there's a chance of human extinction?
Yes. But I think that an important thing to understand is that like people sort of believe what they need to believe in order to think that they're good people and that they need to keep doing what they're doing. This is what rationalization is. And so I think that the tech CEOs have like genuinely convinced themselves that like probably things are going to be fine, and that the way to make things fine is for them to keep doing what they're doing. And like they need to like make sure that like, you know, Sam's probably thinking like, can't let Dario or Elon get there first. You know, I know Dario is thinking Sam can't get there first. Elon's thinking that, like, you know, they've all probably convinced themselves that like, oh yeah, like maybe it'll go horribly wrong, but like probably it's going to be fine, and probably, you know, I should be the one in charge.
Now, this is that part again that I don't like about this particular thing when we talk about AI, is that people are like, I should be the one to be in charge. Why? Because I will be the one to do good for everybody. And so instead of working together, I mean, we should be all working together, but nobody trusts each other. That's the thing. You know, with something this powerful, with something that can cause this much change in society, they don't trust each other. And it starts to make me wonder, should we be trusting many of them with the leadership of this without regulating them? And so this is what I'm getting to right now. And I'm not saying we want full regulations, but we might need to start coming up with some ideas, coming up with some solutions. But listen up.
I really don't want to be in a situation where we're like, which CEO is the least bad CEO? Let's support that one. You know, like none of these people should be trusted with that much power, basically.
Nobody should.
Nobody should.
Regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has always been why I've had this outstanding question, which is how does this not go bad when human incentives seem to rule the day when you look at history, and all of the human incentives are saying, well, if you're damned if you do, i.e. you're damned if you carry on developing these bigger and bigger AI brains, but you're also then damned if you don't from a geographical perspective, because the United States will lose to that country, or this company will lose to that company. So when you just look at human incentives and goes, how does if just purely incentives and disincentives, how does this end? Well, it carries on going.
Seems like it. I mean, there is a caveat to that, which is a hopeful caveat, which is that, first of all, if the world wakes up to all of this, then there can be a more serious conversation about regulation and international treaties and things like that. And that can change the incentives.
Okay. Now, this is what I'm talking about. Wake up. I've been saying this for a while. Wake up. Stop sleeping, folks. Stop sleeping when we have a chance to get together and start coming up with some ideas. I put out a blog post. We started talking about some of these particular ideas when it comes to the types of committees we can have built. I talked about the jobs we haven't invented yet. And in those jobs, I talked about a few jobs which focused on occupational research and development, but occupational research and development in AIs and how we research humans, how they're being programmed off the human techniques, how they're being programmed off of human understanding, how they're being programmed off of human skills. Who's owning the IP to these? Or do we have any people doing like human judgment cartographers or robot scenario directors? We need people in these jobs now. And in these jobs, not just that, we need people sitting back and in committee jobs that sit down and help us to kind of figure out what kind of laws we can put in place to kind of curtail what may happen in the future.
So the government could come in and say, like, actually, here's some rules that you all have to follow. And because they're rules that you all have to follow, then you're not incentivized to like break them anymore because you get punished if you break them. And everyone else is also following them too, and so it's fine. So there is that sort of like ray of hope that like we can change the incentives if the government, and especially the U.S. government, but then later other countries act to change the incentives. But that's not going to happen until people sort of wake up to all of this. The second thing is that even individually, at some point, Dario or Sam or Elon might realize that like actually it's like not even in their own interest to keep racing unilaterally. And the problem with that is it's only if it gets extremely obvious and extremely dire. So like in AI 2027, in that scenario, there's this choice point that I mentioned. And in one case, the AIs are misaligned. In the other case, the AIs are aligned. At that choice point, we have like one branch that depicts the misalignment ending and one branch that depicts like they slow down a bit and solve the alignment issues.
Mm-hmm.
The instigator for that choice point is they see some evidence that their AI might be misaligned and plotting against them, right? So if you actually see that evidence, then it's like, oh gosh, maybe we shouldn't put it in charge of everything and let it rip,
Now, that is a good statement. What if we do see evidence that it is? Are these particular leaders in these industries going to be responsible enough to say, okay, you know what? We need to stop this right now. Now, we know Anthropic, Dario has, at Anthropic, he said, this could hack all the systems. So they've already shown that they can do it. But I mean, how many others do we really trust will do that? Remember, this is business is war. Business is war is a race, and they're on a race to be the first to get there.
Because that's evidence is staring us right in the face that it's untrustworthy, But if they don't see that sort of very clear evidence, then I think they're going to convince themselves that they need to keep going, But maybe they will see very clear evidence like that, in which case, even if we don't have regulation, they might just sort of voluntarily stop. So that's the second ray of hope. Like overall, I don't think that we're like definitely doomed, Like I said, 70%, but like I could see it working out pretty well as well.
What about jobs?
Yeah. So I think I'm excited to at some point get into the new thing, which is the more optimistic, positive vision, and that will have a lot to say about this, because in the prediction, in AI 2027, by the time everyone loses their jobs, there are worse things happening, or like it's kind of like too late by that point.
Okay, now let me explain something real quick. David Kokotajlo basically wrote with a team. He sat down with a team and they put together this package called AI 2027, which starts to predict what's going to happen throughout the years, which is interesting because many of their predictions are the same predictions in my book Zeitgeist about what's going to happen, except they expedite some of the things and think it's going to take on a bigger change by 2037, except recently they've been doing their numbers and their numbers seem that things are moving faster.
But yes, like just think about it. If the companies do manage to build super intelligence, then by definition, they're going to be able to take almost all the jobs or all the jobs, right? Because it's better, faster, cheaper than the best humans at everything.
And that, again, the timeline is by the end of sort of 2030, you think superintelligence might arrive. I'm trying to think about when we could start to see job displacement in the economy.
We're already starting to see a little bit of it now, but not very much.
Why?
Because the AIs aren't good enough yet. Like they're impressive, but they're not just a drop-in replacement for a human worker in almost any field.
And do you think that'll be sudden?
I think it'll be sudden because of the intelligence explosion dynamics or recursive self-improvement dynamics.
Okay, wait. We got to go back for a second, because what he's talking about real quick is how these companies are doing things a little bit differently than what we would normally see in a progression of a type of industrial revolution, or the progression of a type of technology revolution, because of the nature of learning language models. Learning language models are able to build upon our AI are able to build upon an agent and replicate that agent and then have multiple agents. So when you have multiple agents, the same agents that you can continually upgrade, it's not the same as something like the World Wide Web, where you have multiple websites where multiple people are upgrading them individually. No, these are machines upgrading them, and that can upgrade them faster and faster and faster. And so what he's talking about is that these companies are inwardly doing things so that they can get to a certain point of super intelligence so they can turn around and just drop it on everybody. And when he means drop it on everybody, we're talking about people losing jobs today and getting laid off today. Well, if the wrong person gets ahead of the game, everybody will be laid off all at once with no backup plan. If the right people are behind the game, or if there's some kind of understanding between the government, the people, and these tech companies, then we could have an era of abundance, like that's been talked about by, I believe, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others, because they do see that there's two options.
So you could imagine a different world where it's gradual.
Mm-hmm.
And this is maybe how it is in a lot of science fiction, is, the AIs gradually get better at a bunch of things, and, they gradually automate like this one industry, like pharma, and then they automate like, steering drones, then they automate like driving cars or something like that. But what's different about the real world is that the companies have converged on this strategy of automating themselves first, automating the AI research process. And so if they're allowed to continue with this strategy, we're not going to see like, the robo-taxis and like the plumber robots and, the lawyer AIs. We're not going to see that sort of like broad diffusion of AI into the economy happening first, because that's not what they're focusing on first. They're focusing on automating themselves, automating their own research so that they can do everything that they're doing faster. And they want that to sort of get going and get to, very high levels of intelligence, very high levels of general intelligence, and then deploy more out into the economy, right? So by the time it's actually coming for like all these different jobs, they will have had fully autonomous AI research happening for months, maybe years, And that means that like the AIs will be vastly superhuman at AI research, and probably also vastly superhuman at lots of other things, just as a side effect,
And this is that part I'm talking about right here. You're going to have, at that point, AI so much more advanced than we can even even process any of this information. They're going to be able to do so much, and they're going to be able to put it in these robots in another time. Now, if you're not owning any of the IP of you being the mechanic, showing them how the mechanic is turning a wrench, helping these systems grow, or if you're not putting yourself in positions to where you can own some IP later, the wrong person owning your IP or that skill IP can keep you from ever advancing in the future if they decide that there's no kind of universal basic income, or even if they decide there's some universal basic income. Everybody could be on a universal basic income that's not really actually sustainable unless there's some kind of investment. I mean, there's all kind of things that can do to sustain it, but who knows? Who knows what one of these leaders will do and how they will treat the system. We've seen all these dystopian universe futures, and even in the one future that shows this transition that we're all talking about, the Star Trek future, even in that future, there was a time of a period of dystopia that they had to go through before they actually got to a point of reaching the stars and meeting with the Vulcans. So this is not something that people haven't been thinking about for years. It's not just like, oh, now we got AI. It just popped up, especially when AI really came to fruition in 2016 when NVIDIA made the AI computer. So when we talk about this whole spectrum that we're on and the voyage to the next level, I want y'all to kind of understand that it's time for us to get up there and stand up, to us to build some kind of committees, us to build some kind of ideas around how we can regulate these companies. Not regulate the AI per se, but regulate these companies for the future of mankind. I'm just saying.
If you're wondering what this looks like, well, we wrote about what it looks like. It's sort of like this wave smashing through the economy after they do the intelligence explosion internally.
What I'm hearing there is that because the AI will be able to improve itself and train itself, it will be getting better at everything at once, and then it will be released at kind of once. Is that accurate?
But it's not even exactly that, because even if it's mostly just getting better at the things that it's doing, like research, that'll have some spillover effects to other skills as well. And then when it turns to focusing on those other skills, it'll be able to do them very fast.
So what jobs remain in such a scenario, do you think?
I think that's actually a political question, not a technical question.
Okay, I like how he answers this. What jobs remain is a political question.
Because
on a technical level, all the jobs can be done by the AIs if they've reached that level. And so it's a question of what jobs are allowed for them to do.
And see, now this is a very important factor here. What jobs are we allowing humans to do? And what jobs are we allowing AI to do? How much control are we giving AI? And how much control are we giving humans? What humans are we giving control? And what AIs are we giving control to? These are things that need to be decided, and it takes people to decide. It takes voters to decide. We need some of these freedoms to be watched after and looked out for. And not only do we need these freedoms watched after and looked out for, but we need to make sure that some of the things that can tear down these freedoms are defended against as well. And so we need to start thinking about where we are in the future. All this old stuff that we used to do needs to go out the way, and we need to start thinking about this stuff now. Because if we end up a third world country, then somebody else is going to be ruling us, and there will be no First Amendment anymore. There will be no gun rights anymore. There will be none of the rights that we have. And so we need to sit up, get down, and start putting our minds together and start figuring out ways that we can regulate companies in a good way that motivate them to do good for us as a country, but also motivate us to do good for ourselves.